Hello, my name is Harlan, I'm 38, I fix things for a living, washers, dryers, refrigerators, the occasional vintage radio. I live here in this small house on a quiet street where the trees are older than most of the residents. It's the house I grew up in. My life has a certain rhythm to it, a predictability I've come to rely on. The days start with the smell of coffee and the low hum of the furnace in the winter. They end with the scent of solder and grease on my hands, a satisfying ache in my back. I have a workshop in the garage filled with schematics, spare parts, and the quiet company of machines that wait patiently for me to understand them. People say it must be a lonely existence, but I've never seen it that way. There's a peace in the logic of a broken circuit, a clarity you don't often find in people. My routine was a fortress built of simple, repeatable actions. Wake up, make coffee, drive the van to a job, listen to the quiet rattle of tools in the back, come home, work in the garage. Eat dinner standing over the sink, read a book, sleep, a closed loop. It was enough, or at least I had convinced myself it was. The upstairs of my house had been converted into a small apartment years ago by my father, a project he never quite finished, but rented out anyway. For the last 2 years, it had been empty. I liked the silence. It meant the house was truly mine. Every creak and groan familiar, but the property taxes had gone up and the quiet was starting to feel less like peace and more like a vacuum. So, I put an ad online. A week later, a young man named Theo moved in. He was a student at the local college, all nervous energy and boxes filled with textbooks and video games. He seemed like a good kid, quiet, kept to himself. That suited me fine. I helped him carry a heavy dresser up the narrow staircase and in return he promised to keep the music down. A simple transaction. It was 2 days after he moved in that I met her. I was in the garage methodically cleaning the carburetor from a lawn mower, my hands stained black. The side door creaked open and Theo stood there looking apologetic. "Hey Harlan, sorry to bother you," he said, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "The fridge up there. It's not getting cold." I wiped my hands on a rag, the grease just smearing into a new pattern. "I can take a look." I followed him up the outdoor stairs that led to his apartment. The door was ajar. Inside, a woman was on her knees, scrubbing at a stubborn mark on the hardwood floor. She had her back to me. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and she wore a simple gray sweatshirt. "My sister Elara," Theo said, announcing our arrival. She looked over her shoulder and for a moment she just stayed there halfway between kneeling and standing. She was beautiful. But it was a tired kind of beauty. There were faint dark circles under her eyes, like smudges of charcoal, and her smile didn't quite reach them. It was a polite smile, a functional one. "Hello," she said. Her voice was lower than I expected. "Softer Harlan," I said, nodding. "Theo says the fridge is on the fritz." She finally stood, wiping her hands on her jeans. "It is. We put some groceries in last night, and everything is lukewarm." "I'm sorry to pull you away from your work, it's my work," I replied, and the corner of her mouth twitched, the smile becoming a little more genuine. I slid the refrigerator away from the wall. The sound of the compressor kicking on and then immediately off was a familiar death rattle. I knew what it was before I even opened the back panel. A bad relay, an easy fix. They stood in the small kitchen watching me. Theo was scrolling on his phone, already mentally checked out. But Elara watched my hands. She didn't say anything, she just observed as I clipped the wires, pulled out the faulty part, and rummaged in my pocket for the spare I almost always carried. There was an unspoken focus in her gaze, an appreciation for the simple, tangible act of repair. After a few minutes the compressor hummed to life. A steady, healthy sound this time. I slid the unit back into place. "Should be good now. Give it an hour or two to get down to temperature." "Thank you," Elara said. She opened one of the still warm cans of soda on the counter. "Can I offer you something? A water, a tragically room temperature Coke?" I almost said no. It was my habit to finish a job and leave, to retreat back into my own space, but something in her expression, a flicker of hopefulness, made me pause. "Water would be great, thanks." She handed me a bottle from a case on the floor. Our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. It was nothing. A meaningless accidental contact, but it felt like a current, a small jolt of electricity that broke through the insulation I'd wrapped around myself for years. Her eyes met mine just for a moment, and I saw it again. That profound bone-deep tiredness. It was a look I recognized because I'd seen it in my own reflection on my lonelier nights. Then it was gone. Shuttered away behind another polite smile. "Well," I said, taking a step back toward the door. "Let me know if you have any other trouble." "We will," she said, and it sounded like a promise. I went back to my garage, but the smell of grease and oil suddenly seemed stale. The quiet felt heavier. I thought about the way she watched my hands. as if the simple act of fixing something was a kind of magic she hadn't seen in a long time. I wondered what was broken in her life that couldn't be fixed with a new relay and a pair of pliers. It was a question I had no right to ask, but it hung in the air long after I'd finished the lawn mower and washed the grease from my hands. A week later, I got a text from Theo. Dishwasher's making a weird grinding noise. I went up. Elara was there again, sitting at the small kitchen table with a laptop, though it was closed. She said Theo was at the library. She made a pot of coffee and offered me a cup. I accepted. The grinding noise, it turned out, was just a stray fork that had fallen into the bottom of the machine. An easy fix. We talked while I worked. Small talk, the weather, the town. She asked me about my house, if I'd always lived here. Most of my life, I told her, tightening a hose clamp. My dad was the one who built this apartment. He was always starting projects and finishing them. She asked, a gentle tease in her voice. I smiled. Not always. That part he usually left to me. She was easy to talk to, or rather she was easy to be quiet with. The silences weren't awkward, they were comfortable. Filled only with the clink of my tools and the slow ticking of the clock on her wall. She told me she was an editor, that she worked from home. She didn't mention a husband. I didn't ask. This became the new routine. Every week or two, something else would break. The thermostat would get stuck. A faucet would develop a slow drip. The screen door hinge would come loose. Theo was never around. It was always just Elara waiting with a cup of coffee and a quiet presence that was quickly becoming the anchor of my week. I knew on some level that a house this small couldn't have this many problems. I knew the faucet probably wasn't dripping that badly, that the thermostat was likely fine. But I kept coming because she kept asking. Our conversations slowly deepened, moving from the superficial to the personal. She spoke in careful edited sentences, giving away little pieces of her life, like she was testing the water. She talked about a life in the city that sounded shiny on the surface but hollow underneath. She mentioned a husband, Donovan, just once or twice. His name was always attached to a business trip or a late night at the office. He was an abstraction, a ghost in her story. He doesn't like small towns, she said one afternoon, watching me recaulk the seal around her bathtub. He says there's nothing to do here. There's plenty to do, I said. It's just quieter. I like the quiet, she said. And the way she said it made me think she hadn't had much of it in her life. I found myself looking forward to the texts from Theo, to the fabricated emergencies that brought me upstairs. Her apartment became a sanctuary from my own structured silence. It was a different kind of quiet, a shared quiet. I was becoming a student of her moods. I could tell by the way she held her coffee mug if it was a good day or a bad day. I could see the tension in her shoulders when she was trying to hide her sadness. And I could see it melt away as we sat together, not talking, just listening to the house settle around us. I was fixing her appliances, but it felt like she was fixing me. Each visit chipped away at the rust that had accumulated around my own heart. I was starting to feel things I hadn't felt in a very long time. A gentle, persistent hope. A longing for the sound of her key in the upstairs door. It was terrifying and it was wonderful. I was no longer just the man who lived downstairs. I was Harlan, and I was waiting for the next thing to break. One Thursday night it happened. The text came late, around 900. It was from Theo as usual. Hey Harlan. Garbage disposal is making a weird noise. Elara's here. Can you come up? I knew it was a lie. The disposal was brand new. I'd installed it myself 2 months ago, but I put on my shoes and went anyway. The air was cool, carrying the first real hint of autumn. I walked up the wooden stairs, my footsteps echoing in the stillness of the evening. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open gently. The apartment was dark except for the small lamp on the kitchen counter, which cast a soft golden glow over the room. Theo was nowhere to be seen. Elara was sitting at the table, her back to me. Her shoulders were shaking slightly. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my hand on the frame. My first instinct was to retreat to give her privacy, but my feet wouldn't move. Elara, I said, my voice barely a whisper. She didn't turn around. The disposal is fine, she said, her voice thick. I'm sorry. I couldn't think of another excuse. I stepped inside and closed the door softly behind me. I walked over to the kitchen table and sat down in the chair across from her. She finally looked up. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen. The careful composure she always maintained was completely gone. In its place was a raw, unfiltered vulnerability that took my breath away. It's okay, I said. It was all I could think of to say. She let out a shaky breath that was half laugh, half sob. Is it? Nothing feels okay. She stared down at her hands, which were clenched into tight fists on the tabletop. Donovan thinks I'm at my book club. We don't have a book club anymore. It disbanded 2 years ago. She looked at me, her eyes pleading for something. Not a solution, not advice, just understanding. He didn't ask what book we were reading, she continued, her voice trembling. He hasn't asked me a real question in years. We just orbit each other. 2 planets in a cold, dead solar system. Sometimes I feel like I'm screaming, but I'm not making any sound. The silence in the room was immense. It held her confession, her pain, her exhaustion. I didn't try to fill it. I didn't tell her what to do. I didn't say it would all work out. I just sat there with her, a silent witness to the truth she had finally spoken aloud. I reached across the table and gently touched her clenched fist with my fingertips. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was an anchor, a simple physical statement. I am here. You are not alone in this moment. She slowly unfurled her fingers and turned her hand over, her palm facing up. I rested my hand over hers. We sat like that for a long time in the quiet glow of the single lamp while the house breathed around us. Her tears subsided. The tension in her shoulders eased. Thank you, Harlan, she whispered finally. You don't have to thank me, I said. In that moment, something shifted between us. The carefully constructed wall of pretense, the broken appliances. The casual coffee crumbled into dust. We were just 2 people sitting in a dimly lit kitchen, sharing a silence that was more honest than any conversation I'd ever had. I knew then that I would do anything to protect that quiet space for her, to be the person she could be silent with. I had fallen in love not with the beautiful, composed woman who offered me coffee, but with the heartbroken stranger who sat across from me, her hand resting in mine. And I knew my quiet, predictable life was over. A new one, uncertain and terrifying and full of hope, was just beginning. The next 2 weeks were quiet. There were no more fabricated emergencies. We'd crossed a line, and we both seemed to know it. We didn't talk about that night. We didn't have to. The understanding hung between us, a shared secret. I'd see her coming or going, and we'd exchange a small, knowing smile. The sadness was still in her eyes, but now there was something else too. A flicker of strength, a resolve that hadn't been there before. Then on a Saturday afternoon everything changed. I was in my garage. The wide door opened to the autumn air. I was meticulously cleaning the contacts on a vintage amplifier, a delicate job that required all my focus. The smell of contact cleaner hung in the air. That's when the car pulled into my driveway. It was a black Mercedes so polished it reflected the clouds in the sky. It seemed out of place on our humble street, an alien vessel from another world. A man got out of the driver's side. He was tall, dressed in a sharply tailored navy blue suit, and shoes that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He had a look of casual, confident ownership. As if the whole world was his executive lounge. He didn't look at me. He looked past me at the house, his expression a mixture of impatience and disdain. It had to be Donovan. He strode toward the upstairs apartment, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel. He didn't knock. He just called out, his voice sharp and cutting, devoid of any warmth. Elara, are you ready? We're going to be late. The words weren't a question, they were a command. I stayed perfectly still. A small screwdriver clutched in my hand. A cold, protective anger coiled in my gut. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to tell him to lower his voice to show some respect. But I knew it wasn't my place. This wasn't my fight. My role was to be the quiet harbor, not the warship. Any move I made would only make things worse for her. The upstairs door opened and Elara appeared on the landing. From the garage, I could see the instant transformation. The flicker of strength I'd seen in her over the past 2 weeks vanished, extinguished like a candle flame in a gust of wind. Her shoulders slumped. Her face became a neutral mask. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Elegant and formal. She looked like a stranger, a woman playing a part. I'll be right down, Donovan, she said, her voice flat and obedient. He glanced down at his watch, a thin silver thing on his wrist. 5 minutes, he didn't wait for a reply. He turned and walked back to his car, pulling out his phone and immediately becoming absorbed in it. He exuded an aura of profound indifference. Elara's eyes found mine across the yard. For a single heartbreaking second, her mask slipped. I saw the panic, the despair, the silent plea. I just held her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I just looked at her, trying to pour all the strength and patience I had into that one look. I tried to tell her without words that I was still here, that this man and his shiny car didn't change anything. That the quiet space we'd built was still waiting for her. She gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. Then she turned and disappeared back into the apartment. I went back to my amplifier, but my hands were shaking. The delicate work was impossible now. The silence of my garage no longer felt like peace. It felt like the tense, heavy quiet before a storm. I had passed the test. I had stayed in my place, but I had never felt more helpless in my entire life. The storm broke a week later. It was late, well after midnight. I was in bed reading when I heard it, a muffled shout from upstairs. Then another, sharper this time. A man's voice, angry and dismissive. Donovan's voice. I couldn't make out the words, only the cold, hard tone. Then a door slammed with such force that a picture frame on my own wall rattled. The sound of a car engine roaring to life, tires squealing as it pulled out of the driveway and sped down the street. Then an unnerving silence. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding. I thought about going up, about checking on her, but I forced myself to wait. This was her moment, her decision. My presence would only complicate it. I had to trust her. I had to trust the strength I'd seen flickering within her. 20 minutes passed. The silence stretched thin and fragile. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen to get a glass of water, my ears straining for any sound from above. Nothing. Just the hum of my own refrigerator. Then I heard it. Not a knock on the upstairs door, but on my own. A soft, hesitant tapping on the back door that led out to the yard. I opened it. Elara was standing there, silhouetted by the dim light of the porch lamp. She was holding a single, worn-looking suitcase. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. The tears were gone. The panic was gone. In their place was a quiet, unshakable resolve. She had made her choice. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't ask to stay. She just looked at me, her gaze steady. "Can you drive me to the bus station?" she asked, her voice low but firm. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't ask where she was going or when she was coming back. She didn't need an interrogation. She needed a ride. "Of course," I said. "Let me get my keys." I helped her with the suitcase, placing it carefully in the back of my van among the toolboxes and spare parts. She got into the passenger seat without a word. The drive to the bus station was silent. The streets of our small town were deserted, washed in the lonely orange glow of the street lights. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence felt necessary, respectful. The station was a sterile, brightly lit box that smelled of disinfectant and faint desperation. Only a few other people were there, scattered on the hard plastic chairs, lost in their own worlds. I checked the departure board. A bus heading north was leaving in 45 minutes. "I have a friend in Portland," she said as if sensing my question. "I can stay with her for a while." "Okay," I said. I bought her a coffee from a vending machine. It was terrible, but she held it in her hands as if it were a precious source of warmth. We sat on the uncomfortable chairs, her suitcase resting at her feet. It felt like the end of something. It felt like the beginning of something. It was both. When they finally called her bus, we stood up. There was a moment of awkward hesitation. What do you say in a moment like this? There were no words for the gratitude, the fear, the hope that hung in the air between us. "Thank you, Harlan," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. "For everything, for the leaky faucets, for the coffee, for just being quiet with me." "Be safe, Elara," I said. It felt inadequate, but it was all I had. She reached out and squeezed my arm, a brief, firm gesture of farewell. Then she turned, picked up her suitcase, and walked toward the bus without looking back. I watched until the automatic doors hissed shut behind her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had been, the faint warmth of her touch still lingering on my arm. Then I walked back to my van, the sole occupant of my quiet, empty house. Time began to pass in a slow, steady rhythm, like the drip of a faucet I couldn't fix. The first few weeks were the hardest. The silence in the house was different now. It wasn't the comfortable solitude I had known before. It was an absence. Every creak from the empty apartment upstairs was a phantom footstep, a memory of a presence that was no longer there. Theo moved out a month after Elara left. He did it quietly, hiring a couple of his college friends. He left the key on the kitchen counter with a short scribbled note. "Thanks for everything. Tell Elara I'm sorry." The apartment was officially empty again. I went up and walked through the vacant rooms, the air stale and still. The faint scent of her coffee was gone. It was just a space again. I fell back into my old routine, but it felt hollow. The work was still satisfying. The logic of the machine still a comfort, but the closed loop of my life now felt like a cage. I had tasted something else. A connection that went beyond wires and circuits, and the memory of it lingered. Elara and I kept in touch, but it was sporadic, careful. A text from her once a week or so. A picture of a foggy morning over the Willamette River. Found a decent coffee shop. Another of a book she was reading. This one made me cry. They were small signals. Little proofs of life sent across the miles. She was building something new for herself, and I knew she needed the space to do it without the weight of whatever we were, or whatever we might become. My replies were just as simple. A picture of the 1950s toaster I'd restored. "It's chrome gleaming, it makes perfect toast. A shot of the first snowfall blanketing my yard. The world is quiet today. We were maintaining a connection. A thin, delicate thread stretched across hundreds of miles, careful not to put too much weight on it, lest it snap. Months passed. Autumn gave way to the deep freeze of winter, which then slowly melted into the muddy promise of spring. The upstairs apartment remained empty. I had a few inquiries, but I always found a reason not to rent it out. The timing wasn't right, the applicant seemed too loud. The truth was, I was keeping it for her. A silent, hopeful gesture she knew nothing about. One Tuesday in late April, I was at the diner. It's the kind of place that hasn't changed in 50 years, with red vinyl booths and a countertop worn smooth by decades of elbows and coffee cups. It was my place. I was sitting in my usual booth nursing a cup of coffee and reading the paper. The bell over the door jingled. I glanced up, a reflexive habit, and my heart stopped. It was her. She stood in the doorway, blinking in the sudden brightness of the diner. Her hair was a little shorter, and she was wearing a simple blue dress I'd never seen before, but the change was in her eyes. The deep, wary sadness was gone completely. The haunted look had been replaced by a calm, settled peace. She looked serene. She looked like she was finally home in her own skin. Our eyes met across the room. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face. A real smile that lit up everything around her. She walked toward my booth. "Is this seat taken?" she asked. I felt like I couldn't breathe. "It's been waiting for you," I managed to say. She slid into the vinyl seat across from me. The waitress came over and Elara ordered a coffee black. We just looked at each other for a moment, the bustling sounds of the diner fading into a low hum. "You're back," I said, stating the obvious. "I'm back," she confirmed. "I got a small place over on Elm Street. The divorce is final. It's all quiet now. We didn't talk about Donovan. We didn't talk about the night she left. There was no need to rehash the past. It was a closed chapter. We talked about her time in Portland, the job she'd found with a small publishing house there, which she was now doing remotely. We talked about my work, about the vintage radio I was still tinkering with. The conversation was easy, effortless. It felt like picking up a conversation from yesterday, not one left hanging for half a year. She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup, her expression open and clear. "The upstairs apartment," she said. "Is it still empty?" I took a slow sip of my own coffee. The warmth spreading through my chest. I thought about my quiet, predictable life, the fortress of routine I had built around myself. It seemed like a lifetime ago. That man was a stranger to me now. This man, the one sitting in a diner booth across from the woman who had dismantled his world and then rebuilt it into something better, was someone new. He was anchored. He was hopeful. "Yes," I said, a smile finding its way to my lips. "It is." We sat there in the afternoon, light slanting through the diner window, and I knew that this was not an ending. It was a beginning, a quiet one, a hopeful one. And for the first time in a very long time I was not afraid of what came next. What Harlan and Elara teach us is that real love doesn't arrive with speeches. It arrives with presence. A man who fixes machines learned to honor what he could not fix in another person. Her timing, her fear, her choice. He didn't rescue, he made room. He didn't argue, he listened. And when the moment came, he drove her to the bus station and kept the silence sacred. That's the lesson. You don't heal people by tightening the bolts of their lives. You heal the moment by offering steadiness, respect, and a place where truth can breathe. We think grand gestures change everything. Often it's smaller rituals: a glass of water, a steady gaze across a room, a willingness to do nothing dramatic and everything faithful. Harlan's garage smelled of oil and solder, but what he really practiced was attention. Gentle, consistent, unshowy. Attention is love with its sleeves rolled up. It waits. It doesn't demand. It believes that if something is meant to return, it will knock at your door with clear eyes. Hold space. Protect the quiet. Let people choose their freedom, even when your heart trembles. And when they come back, not to be saved but to stand beside you, you'll recognize the sound, the soft hum of a life finally running right. What's the quietest thing someone has done for you that changed everything? Or the small act you offered that mattered more than words? Share your story below. I read every comment. If this moved you, subscribe for more soul-heavy stories and human truths. Your presence here helps this little corner of the internet keep its light on.